Well, welcome back, everyone. To continue our workshop, we have Chitra Sankaran, who will speak on negotiating the Twilight Zone, the predicament of Tamil teachers and learners in Singapore. Now, Chitra, I must stress, is a member of the Department of English Language and Literature, not of Tamil Studies. Yeah, but this is just her impressive credentials in just two language and cultural areas. She has a special interest in Tamil language, literature, and pedagogy, and has participated in Tamil language review committees, 2004, 2009, and other Tamil cultural activities as well. So very, very impressive. But she is, I stress, a member of my department, English language and literature. So Chitra, please.
Thank you, Robbie. At the outset, like Robbie mentioned, I must confess that neither Tamil language per se nor language policies are my primary or even secondary areas of research. But so my observations made in this paper will be based on empirical rather than theoretical knowledge of the area. So negotiating the Twilight Zone, the predicament of Tamil teachers and learners in Singapore. Establishing the background. Here I will be looking at evolving population profile and implications for mother tongue learning. The recently released census, Singapore Census 2010, shows the varied and evolving profile of Singapore's population. In keeping with the policy of the government, which in recent years has emphasized the necessity of a critical mass, overall, the census revealed that Singapore's population grew by 26% over the last decade, numbering 5.08 million as of June 2010. Though the number of citizens increased by only 8% to 3.2 million, which forms about two-thirds of the total population, the number of permanent residents, or PRs, grew by 88% to 541,000, while the population of non-citizens and non-PRs increased by 73% to 1.3 million. The education profile of the island has also significantly changed over the last decade, with 23% of the citizenry now graduates, an increase from 12% a decade earlier. Also, Singapore has reached a 96% literacy rate. All these parameters demonstrate the success of the island's immigration policies as a whole and its education policies specifically. But what is most significant to our purposes is that a greater section of the population, nearly 71%, is said to be bilingual. This is a considerable jump from 56% over a decade ago. This upward trend in bilingualism should, by right, enthuse educators in Singapore, since bilingual education in English and mother tongue languages is often identified as the cornerstone of Singapore's education system. This is because Singapore, unlike the UK of David Cameron's recent vision, prides itself on its multiculturalism, but also places emphasis on its Asian roots. As Lionel pointed out earlier, the mother tongues, Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil, are conceived as cultural repositories of traditional values for their respective ethnic groups, pivotal to Asian identity formation. At the same time, the importance of English as the global language of communication is also emphasized, and hence English is inevitably the overall medium of instruction in schools, universities, ITEs, and polytechnics. As such, the increase in bilingualism in both EL and mother tongue languages would be seen as a positive move. However, the bilingual scene may not be as rosy as it first appears, as the picture is far more complicated and needs to be unraveled. Firstly, census data confirm that Singaporeans from all ethnic groups are using more English at home. Among the Chinese, 32.6% now use English as opposed to the 23.9% from 2000. Amongst the Malays, there is nearly a 10% increase, and amongst the Indians, the numbers using English at home stands the highest with 41.6%. This is an increase of nearly 6% from a decade ago. This is no doubt in keeping with the overall objective of Singaporean educators, since there is a parallel and coeval acknowledgement that it is English that enables Singaporeans to integrate with confidence into a global socio-economic domain. However, this is against the broad language ideology that stresses the pastoral role of the mother tongue languages as opposed to the pragmatic and economic role of English as a global language. Hence, the use of English as the primary home language seems opposed to this bifocal pastoral and pragmatic language orientations that the bilingual education scheme aims to achieve. Furthermore, there is identifiable a definite pattern in the English usage amongst youngsters. It has been found that this trend is more prevalent among younger Singaporeans aged between 5 and 14. Statistics emerging out of the National Population and Talent Division of the Singapore government reveal that half of the Chinese and Indians and a quarter of the Malays in this age group speak English. This again means that increasingly younger Singaporeans are getting more alienated from their mother tongue languages and see English as their primary language of communication. It has also been noted that this learning is more common among those with tertiary education and higher. This by itself may not necessarily smudge the bilingual picture, and indeed amongst the Chinese population this might be seen as a positive move because parallel to the rise in English usage is discovered a rise in Mandarin usage as well, which has seen an escalation to 47.7% from 45.1% in the earlier census. However, this increased usage may well be detected as mainly reflecting usage amongst recent immigrants or permanent residents hailing from China or elsewhere. Moreover, this effective and simultaneous rise in both English language and mother tongue language use is not reflected in the other two ethnic groups. Census 2010 discloses the fact that fewer Malays and Indians are using their official mother tongue languages respectively. Significantly, the most notable decrease is in the use of Tamil, which has come down to 36.7% among Indians, a significant dip from the 42.9% reflected in the 2000 census. These figures reflect not only changing attitudes to mother tongue usage in Singaporeans as a whole, but specifically with regard to Indians, it also indicates changing demographics. Though the proportion of Indian residents has grown by 1.3 percentage points to the current 9.2%, it has also grown more diverse. The Tamil dialect group has shrunk by 4 percentage points to 54.2%, while the others dialect group within Indians has grown by 4.3 percentage points to 29.1%. All these figures have far-reaching implications for the bilingual education policy in Singapore. This paper will focus on the various hurdles faced in deploying the bilingual policy with regard to Tamil and the implications for the teaching and learning of Tamil in Singapore. Bilingualism, home and education. The home environment in Singapore has evolved over the past decade when it comes to Tamil. There is a long-term trend of English becoming a dominant language used in Indian homes, as shown in the yearly data of incoming Primary 1 students over the past 20 years available at the Ministry of Education. The proportion with English as the most frequently used home language was seen to be 49% in 1991 and 58% in 2010. This has meant that many Indian students coming into primary schools display zero knowledge of the Tamil language, even in its spoken version. However, the MOE survey has revealed a more complex picture of the home learning environment. For instance, among primary 6 pupils learning Tamil language, 38% reported using predominantly English language at home, while roughly 1/3 reported using predominantly their mother tongue languages at home. The remaining 1/4 to 1/3 reported using both English language and mother tongue languages equally. Since home language was found to influence students' attitudes towards proficiency in mother tongue languages, fewer students from English language speaking homes liked learning mother tongue. As such, for these students, motivation and interest needed to be spiked up. Interestingly, in the Tamil community, this was seen as the primary responsibility of curriculum developers and instructors. And not very few Indians, especially parents, were ready to acknowledge that homes had a very important role to play in this. However, motivating the students by educators is not perceived as sufficient because this is only managing the problem superficially. The parents from these English-speaking homes were themselves not enthusiastic participants in the mother tongue language policy. They had mixed opinions about the role and relevance of Tamil in overall education and upward mobility later in life, the perceived level of difficulty of learning Tamil, the methods adopted in teaching mother tongue and their efficacy. The Tamil curriculum developers at Ministry of Education have displayed, I must say, extraordinary sensitivity and receptivity in trying to address the concerns of these parents. I have been involved in the past two Tamil curriculum reviews, and I have discovered that the educators and the curriculum developers are constantly trying to negotiate the varied inputs that they receive from the different groups of parents with different ideas about the teaching and learning and the importance of mother tongue learning. One of the key measures has been the adoption of the differentiated teaching and learning approach at the lower primary levels, with teaching being tailored more specifically to the requirements of the individual groups of students. In having to cope with students with distinctly different levels of learning skills, it would be fair to say that perhaps mother tongue teachers have had to face greater challenges than teachers of other subjects, specifically in a classroom, and I would certainly say that my knowledge of Tamil classrooms would endorse this idea. Since the disparity in exposure to Tamil and consequently the diversity in students' abilities within a classroom is immense and increasing in the Tamil language scenario in Singapore. Thus, differentiated teaching methods adopted in line with recommendations by educators like Carol Tomlinson and Jane Keyes have proved most useful here. The Tamil curriculum has adopted student-centric, customized approaches, especially during the foundation years in primary schools. More support is offered to students with little or no foundation to help them develop confidence in learning the language. Greater efforts have also been made over the past few years to educate parents on the need and necessity of preserving Tamil in Singapore through organizing forums in the language clusters in different zones via schools and through the Umaru Pulavar Tamil Language Center, UPTLC, which is the Central Tamil Resource Center. But the problems are many, and the community is even now deeply disgruntled in many quarters about the learning and the kind of learning and the kind of teaching that is going on in the schools, and we will look at that a little more. The next section is about Tamil, diglossia and associated problems. One of the recurring problems that has surfaced in Tamil learners in Singapore has been the deep dichotomy in skills that exist between the written and spoken mediums. This is perhaps exacerbated in the Tamil language environment due to the highly diglossic nature of Tamil. This has been extensively discussed and demonstrated by Harold Schiffman and other linguists, and it is illustrated here with this example. I will read out the example to you. If you take a sentence like, they left early, in Tamil, you can have the spoken variety, which would be, avanga seekram poitanga, or avanga vellanave poitanga. So this could be dialectical variation in the spoken variety. If you look at the proper written variety, it would be, avargal viraivileye sendru vittargal. So if you look at the two varieties, even the words we are using to denote the going and the early are different in the spoken and written varieties, which means that effectively for people not keyed or immersed in the language environment, it is like learning two different languages. So this wide gulf that exists in Tamil between the written and spoken varieties has meant that thus far students attempt to master only the written variety of Tamil, deeming the knowledge of it necessary to score in examinations. As a consequence, even star pupils who pass out with distinctions in Tamil are incapable of holding a simple conversation in the language. As such, for many Singaporeans, Tamil has become, over a period of time, a mere examinable subject with no connection to their everyday lives. This has meant that the goals of mother tongue learning, traditionally defined by MOE as the 3 C's, namely communication, culture, and connection, has not featured in any significant way in the students' lives. The past 2 Tamil curriculum reviews in 2004 and 2010 have rightly identified this problem as one of the central ones facing Tamil learners in Singapore. This is particularly interesting since it is a predicament that first appeared peculiar to Singapore but has since come to be increasingly identified as typical of Tamil learning in the newer diasporas elsewhere, as in the United Kingdom, United States of America, Canada, and Switzerland. In what are termed as mother countries such as India and Sri Lanka, and even in older diasporas such as Malaysia, the social contexts are identified as nurturing not just the written but also the spoken variety of Tamil, since there exist socio-cultural contexts that encourage active interaction and communication in Tamil in these mother countries. However, in Singapore, with increasing literacy in English, even most Indian grandparents, not merely parents, are reasonably conversant in English, thus depriving young speakers of adequate socio-cultural support to nurture interaction in spoken Tamil at home and in other social contexts. Thus, the most recent Mother Tongue Language Review Committee, in its report released in January 2011, has emphasized active and interactive usage to promote mother tongue as a living language. In line with this objective, it has adopted new teaching methodologies that encourage lively teaching, active use of information and communication technologies, and assessments that test for language proficiency. The use of information and communication technology has been proven effective in nurturing Tamil elsewhere in diasporic settings. For instance, Siva Pillai talks about it in the UK context and insists that it is the only way forward to nurture Tamil in newer diasporas. Encouraging lively chat forums, interacting with video and other virtual systems, creating vodcasts and podcasts are perceived as stimulants to young learners of Tamil. In Singapore, too, the curriculum developers have increasingly come to adopt these methods. Ministry of Education has also introduced a Tamil B syllabus for students who are weak in Tamil. New Tamil B syllabus centers are going to be opened up across the island. These centers will help children who have trouble coping with a mother tongue. Here, too, the increased use of ICT is cited as a useful pedagogical tool. Moreover, both mainstream and the Tamil B syllabuses will lay greater stress on oracy. This emphasis will be evident both inside and outside classrooms and also in teaching for proficiency. Therefore, during examinations, video clips designed to stimulate interaction would be played and students examined on their interactive abilities. This is in line with recent studies on L2 learning strategies. For example, in O'Malley and Chamot, Learning Strategies in Second Language Acquisition, Laszlo seeks out conversation partners. OK groups words to be learned and then labels each group. Ahmed uses gestures to communicate in the classroom when the words do not come to mind. Maichi learns words by breaking them down into their components. Young consciously uses guessing when she reads. These strategies are identified as the tools for active self-directed involvement needed for developing L2 communicative skills, abilities, with emphasis on interactivity. Also, they have realized that it is important to emphasize these strategies in examination settings. The following is a table with a timeline for proposed changes to examination formats. You will find that the video stimuli for oral examination is proposed to be implemented from as early as 2014 going up to 2017, being implemented in various syllabuses and also to A and O levels across the board in a matter of 3 years. And also new items testing interaction skills such as chat forums or giving them a topic for email exchanges for students in examination settings will also be explored and implemented from 2014 to 2016. And then finally, the keyboard input for selected sections of exams will also be explored starting as early as 2013. Research has repeatedly shown that the conscious, tailored use of such strategies in both classroom contexts and examination settings refines language achievement and proficiency. One other development that the ministry has indicated is the use of proficiency descriptors to guide teaching and learning practices for the development of proficient language users. This will explicitly spell out the acquired language skills and levels of attainment students should achieve at various key stages of L2 learning, as in primary 2, primary 4, primary 6, secondary 2, and secondary 4. However, what is perhaps a little shall we say, worrying about this is that it is yet again propounding a certain kind of overall and a schematic way of understanding the proficiency of the students, and how this would actually pan out when it comes to such varied users being taught the language is something that the educators will have to work to understand. The next section deals with ICT interactivity and implications. Not all parents, even the ones who are ardent advocates of Tamil learning, view these developments favorably. They believe that with the introduction of a Tamil language oracy portal, the plan to use video stimuli in national oral exams, the introduction of oral exams including use of video stimulus in O-level higher Tamil from 2016, and the induction of email messaging and other such ICT-based exercises, and the introduction of the Tamil B syllabus, the general depth and vigor of Tamil teaching and learning will be considerably diluted. This view has led to a segment of Tamil parents whose children have higher levels of competence in mother tongue skills to voice their fears that Tamil in school curriculums may become so weak as to not pose challenges to their children. They fear that information and communication-based learning, interactivity and testing may be designed for language users with lower levels of mother tongue, with lower levels of competence. Furthermore, they are of the opinion that of the 3 C goals of mother tongue learning defined by the Ministry of Education, Communication, Culture and Connection that I had mentioned earlier, undue emphasis is being placed on communication and not enough on culture, and that while connections are being enabled at a superficial level, a more in-depth connectivity can only be established through a more extensive literary curriculum and exposure. These parents have expressed their anxieties to teachers and MOE curriculum developers in no uncertain terms. As such, there exist 2 polarized groups of parents within the Tamil language group. At one end, parents are keen that Tamil language, being highly diglossic, needs to be handled in ways that do not tax learners unduly, and that a greater focus on oracy and on communicative and interactive skills should be sufficient without an overemphasis on the written medium. On the other hand, another group consists of parents who are concerned that their children, already proficient users of the language, should seek and find a greater challenge in the Tamil language curriculum designed by the MOE. These parents may be expatriates whose children have had far greater exposure to the Tamil language in their earlier school years, or may be using Tamil language extensively in the home environment. Alternately, they may be the very few Singaporeans who are anxious that their children do not lose their cultural and linguistic identity as a minority group in Singapore. For the former group, MOE has designed the mother tongue language B curriculum and the other tools mentioned above. For the latter, more competent group of users that generally accesses higher Tamil, a new National Elective Tamil Language Program, NETP, is being established from 2012 at the Tamil Resource Center, Umarapulavar Tamil Language Center. Furthermore, a new scheme to award scholarships to deserving NETP students at JC level is also underway and will take effect from 2012. Furthermore, Tamil language students who have accessed higher Tamil language at O levels are also given the option to take Tamil literature as a separate subject for their A levels. All these provisions, it is hoped, will also address the larger anxiety that learning Tamil will not provide for the future. Minister for Education, Mr. Ng Hen, in a recent press release, remarked that this highly proficient group of mother tongue users will be the most favored pool from which future mother tongue teachers for Singapore will emerge. As such, learning Tamil should not be perceived as economically worthless, is what the message says. There are, however, prolonged arguments about other aspects of curriculum planning, such as, for instance, the significance accorded to ICT learning. Despite extensive validation by studies worldwide about the useful role of ICT in teaching Tamil, Singaporean parents still demonstrate a high degree of anxiety regarding student use of web-based learning or learning to communicate using emails and other IT tools. They see it as compromising standards and as diluting the intensity of text-based curriculums. Equally vociferous are the opposing group of parents who feel that Tamil language curriculums should be progressive, contemporary, and designed for modern Singaporean children. As such, they feel that harking back to classical Tamil texts is a non sequitur in trying to design in the current global scenario. Curriculum developers have an uphill task trying to design curriculums that address the concerns of both these groups. The ministry too realizes that commitment to the diverse methods adopted for effective mother tongue learning and instructions involve large sums of money. These are not small considerations in the long run. Despite endless efforts by the ministry and government to address the concerns of parents, we have to conclude that Tamil teaching, designing, and learning remains a deeply contested, emotive subject in Singapore, with divided opinions that debate every aspect of mother tongue teaching and learning, its relevance, its scope, and the pedagogical tools adopted. As such, the curriculum designers and instructors are very aware that they are negotiating a twilight zone that needs to be approached with caution and sensitivity. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chitra, for that very informative and very nuanced talk. Our last speaker is Aishah Mohamad Kassim, who is a lecturer in the Malay language program in the Center for Language Studies and its convener as well in our Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. She's had extensive training in matters to do with the curriculum and the teaching of mother tongue. In fact, her MA was on curriculum development and multicultural education, and a PhD on research on the teaching of mother tongue in Singapore. And she'll be speaking on resisting language loss, the irony of Malay in Singapore.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for staying until quite late now. I'm going through the slides. My topic that I've chosen today is resisting language loss. I think from the presentation that was put forward from Mandarin to Tamil and then now Malay, I think we are all in the same boat. But Malay, I use this term language loss to show to you that over a period of time there has been a language decline and also a language shift. A few of the situations that are highlighted here. Okay, I just want to show to you some quick facts about language highlighted in our youth websites. For example, this website developed during the Youth Olympics period. We see that on this website, young people still mention language. I don't know whether you can see that from your, language as national language Malay. Okay, this website was created in 2010, last year, when we had the Youth Olympics, and it's this perception that Malay is the national language still persists in the thinking of young people now. That's one website. Another website created by young people is the ThinkQuest website. ThinkQuest is a platform or an organization that is called an education foundation, where the young people are encouraged to talk about their country and share their findings with other participants of the competition. And it's also mentioned in language, the ABC of language. The official languages are Malay, Chinese, Tamil, and English, and Malay is the national language. Malay is the national language. I highlight also another website. This website is more instructive, more authoritative in saying that Malay is the national language of Singapore. Show you. The national language shall be Malay, and shall be in the Roman script. I mean, even the Malays do not write in Malay Roman scripts anymore, in the Arabic scripts anymore. We don't use Jawi from the start of the Romanization of Malay language. But here in this website, we see that national language shall be Malay and shall be in Roman scripts. So there is this assumption or affiliation to certain certain views about Malay language. Although we know that if a language is a national language, then there are certain things that will be done to make Malay a national language. But we know from our situation now that Malay language can no longer play that role. We know that the language in education, higher education, in our university, the language is not Malay. In science and technology, language is not Malay. And in administration and legal system, I think we all know that Malay language no longer play this important role. So it's meant as a mother tongue language for the Malays only. So the ironical situation now is actually Malay is widely spoken actually in this region, and we talk about language loss because Malay language is declining in use in all these zones, domains, in areas where one can use a language outside the homes. Now, Malay language is increasingly being replaced by even English, even in the Singaporean Malay homes. There were some quotations from young people saying that Malay is a beautiful language but not so useful one. This was a quotation by a young person when asked why they continue to learn Malay language. As about 10 years ago, in this editorial, there's this article about future of Malay as a living language in Singapore. And Malay, as I quote from the editorial, Malay is said to be a versatile language and beautiful language. And it's spoken by more than 160 million people in this region. But I think Singaporean Malays are not aware of this, and they are in a situation where they feel that the language spoken is not useful because they are bilingual and using English and equipped with the linguistic skills in English to go global. Okay, the Malay language development in Malaysia and Indonesia. Its development is noticeable and very professional, and to make language work, and the users in Malaysia and Indonesia are quite determined to make language, Malay language work, okay, to make it very noticeable. And I think it goes with language planning. In Malaysia, for example, there are corpus planning to ensure that the language is developed in such a way that the issues of language formation, the language is standardized and codified and also modernized. There are institutions, for example, in Malaysia, there are institutions like Dewan Bahasa, the Institute of Language and Literature, established in 1959. And in Indonesia, the National Language Council was set up in 1947. And later on, this center is called the Center for Development and Preservation of National Languages. So these agencies are responsible for the expansion of vocabulary, the codification of language, the modernization of language, and the development of the language is important in tandem with the pronouncement of Malay as a national language, because new terminologies has to be created to fit this field of science and technology, and also the new CIT, the communication and instructional technology. Okay, but sadly for the Malays in Singapore, no matter how hard we try, I think this is what I consider as resisting language loss, because we are faced with a totally different situation. The situation here would be to ensure that our level and quality of the usage, Malay language usage, is not endangered by the use of more dominant English language. So yeah, in Singapore then we are trying to ensure that students in school use a language that is not colloquial, and also to make sure that students use the language outside the classroom. But that's a challenge actually, because from Chinese, Mandarin and Tamil languages, we see that the difficulty in maintaining the environment, the Malay-speaking environment outside the classroom. Okay. I think I would like to mention that there's another group that suffers the fate of language loss. I think perhaps the Peranakan group, which we use the term Peranakan, whose key identity is latched on the Malay language, is actually lost because local Singapore-born Peranakans are identified as Chinese. So their mother tongue in school will be Mandarin. So young Chinese Peranakans do not speak Malay any longer. So that's for me, that's one language loss in the Singapore population. So language loss is actually, it's not it's a process. Okay, there's a process of language shift and language attrition, and we can see that language attrition in schools in Singapore, for example, there's only, the attrition rate is very high because there's only 2 post-secondary education secondary centers. I think they just added 1 after the after January 2011. Even this year they added 1 more junior college center for the learning of Malay language. So the ministry does encourage academically inclined and linguistically talented students to pursue Malay language course at H2 level under the Malay language elective program. It aims to nurture language talent of students who have aptitude for Malay language so that they can attain higher level of proficiency. And there's only about 100 students, and from these 100 students, we are expected to groom our teachers, our media writers, our journalists, and also those who work in the mass media. Malay teachers, yeah, they have accepted that Malay is a language to be taught in school. And because of this, because Malay has become a mother tongue language, then it becomes like under scrutiny by a lot of stakeholders. Now parents, teachers, politicians, leaders, community leaders also want to have a stake in making sure that mother tongue is being the Malay language is being spoken by Malays and being kept as a mother tongue language. The perspectives of Malay teachers, I did this research and find that Malay teachers are actually accepting of the policy. They agree with the policy, and they think that mother tongue policy is timely and appropriate. And they feel that there's a mission, you know, there's a mission when they teach Malay. Their view is that Malay language is important for the inculcation of values and ethnic identity. But I think another ironical position is that since when we were listening to Mandarin and Tamil, and we see that it's not so, you think that it's becoming not so important, but with the bilingual policy, actually, ironically, it helps to keep the Malay language alive, although probably only for the Malays in our Singapore situation. If not, I think the Malays, the Tamils, and the Mandarin speakers will not retain their, I would just say, the speaking ability. Okay, but because our Prime Minister has mentioned that knowing mother tongue helps to center us as an Asian society. So I think the government has their own objectives when they implement this bilingual policy, and they want to maintain the bilingual policy to retain our Asian roots and values. Of course, we can discuss all this and see from the presentation of our friends whether learning Mandarin or learning Tamil or learning Malay keeps us or centers ourselves in Asian society, or does it retain our Asian roots and values? And at the same time, it gives our people the edge in a global society. Actually, this was a reply to what our Minister of Education recommended in his letter, this letter to the PM. And he reiterated that the bilingual policy is a cornerstone of our education system. So it's not likely that the government will lift the education system and lift the bilingual policy and the mother tongue policy and recommend some other language policies, because they feel that our young people, they want to implement all this so that our young people can communicate in their respective mother tongues. But actually, they don't communicate with each other in their, as proven by Chitra and also by the speaker on Mandarin. They don't communicate in their respective mother tongues, and better appreciate our cultural roots, also a questionable objective, because we know that mother tongue learning is very restricted to the classroom, and connect with our communities in Asia. So these were implemented to enable all this. Also, big question mark there. For the Malays, then, what are the challenges? I think because of the demographic changes, Malay continues to be a very difficult language to upkeep in the home even. Okay, as you can see, the population of the Malay is decreasing. From 1970, it's 14.8, and the Malay population is decreased to quite a lot, to 13.4 in 2010. So this has implication, because continuous decline in the Malay population would mean that there's a intergenerational gap, which some language scholars study. The generational transfer is slowly disappearing, and parents, as we know, some studies done by Kamsia and Roxana in NIE shows that parents speak to grandparents in their mother tongue, in this case Malay, but then they speak English to their children. So between children and grandparents, there's total no communication at all. Sometimes the parents will step in to be the mediator. And has shown by previous speakers, also English has become the main medium of instruction. More pupils attending preschools are speaking in English. That means that they grew up with English language. And I think this is a point that we have to consider also, as more mothers go out to work and send their children to childcare centers where the mother tongue is not taught at all. So as children are sent to caregivers who do not use Malay or English, Malay, Tamil or Mandarin, then that would create a big loss to the generational transfer of the language. Then we see also that young people, as recent as 13th February, there was a forum organized for the young people. We find that the Malay kids find that Malay is not a cool language to speak anymore. So I think they cannot find medium of expression in Malay. They find it easier to speak in English with their peers. Yeah, so if we look at the language itself, is obsolescence setting in within the language, we see that there's insufficient exposure to Malay language. The exposure would probably come from Malaysia, maybe. And there's frequent borrowing of vocabulary from English. I think there's linguists feel that the standard of Malay is going down, especially in Singapore, because then the borrowing of vocabulary from English is rather frequent. And simplified and reduced grammar and phonology, the language becomes very colloquial, and then students don't have this aspiration to develop the language to at a higher level, because they don't have the opportunity to, actually. And other socio-economic considerations, of course, they want equal access now to opportunities. If you talk about economic consideration, I think the Malay kids would also think about instrumental goals. Our government wants the goal of MT to be effective goals, that is to retain our Asian roots. But young people are questioning, why shouldn't I learn other languages? Already, I know I'm a Malay, and I know I speak the language. There's no need to study the language in school, because I'm not going to be a literary person who will use the language in future. I know that I'm going to be in science and technology or infocom, in other industries that don't require Malay language. So against an instrumental goal that gives people the edge in the global economy. So our students also, Malay students are also beginning to see that you talk about instrumental goals in other languages. So focusing their attention perhaps to other language, like Mandarin even. Okay? And to achieve effective goals, I think learning the mother tongue should be framed within effective goals too. If students are to be made aware of their Asian roots, then they ought to go, in the teaching itself, ought to go beyond Singapore, because then you'll be trapped. There's Krashen once said that less input, then there's less output also. Then the content of Malay language has to be rich enough to embrace a little history, because language loss would mean loss of history. There's no understanding of history. A little bit of comparative lifestyles, that there are people living in this region that uses the language. And of course, exchange programs, school immersion in the Malay-speaking world. what are the options actually to maintain Malay as a vibrant language, even within our small community. I think maybe parents have to be made aware that children growing up in a semi-bilingual environment can be detrimental to the children's linguistic development. Maybe studies have shown that we have not done any studies in Singapore about the impact of Singlish in the Singaporean home, the environment, or the children's development. But there are studies showing that the students not using their native language and thrown into another language, for example, English, in some countries, students find difficulty in developing even their own native language don't develop, and the majority language, that is English, also do not develop. And many aspects of the Malay language can be raised and developed through usage. And I think the Malay group, Malay Council, Malay Language Promotion and Council, they put in a lot of effort to make sure that the language is being raised to a certain level and also developed through various usage outside the home. I quote Fishman. Fishman, yeah, he researched a lot on language revitalization. Our Malay language is not dead yet. It will not probably require revitalization, but then the commentators, the lesson that we draw from commentators about minority language schooling, which is helpful in Singapore's situation, having the language taught in school helps to maintain the language, but probably insufficient. It's not enough. It's insufficient, ineffective in the absence of other actions in other domains that can reinforce. So I think can reinforce the effects of teaching. So the term comes up again that Malays have to revitalize the language from within. We're trying our level best to maintain the use of language at home and try to expose our children to other usage of Malay in other areas also. Okay, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Aishah. Could I invite the other three speakers as well onto stage?
American, and we had immigration, and the immigrants brought their languages with them, and the languages were gradually lost. But in the United States, that was considered a good thing. It was considered a way of making everybody an American speaking the same language, sharing the common language. And I also feel that what happened in the United States was, what would happen naturally to the languages of small groups. They sort of have to give way to the dominant language. So I'm just curious about whether you really think any of these attempts to maintain these languages are going to succeed in Singapore, or whether the switch toward English is inevitable.
I think the first thing to understand is that when you're talking about language policy, language policies are necessarily informed by some level of language ideology. There are certain assumptions about the kind of society we desire, the way in which languages work, their connection, essentialist or otherwise, with particular communities, the responsibilities that speakers might have towards the languages, the ways in which in a plural society, if you did certain things, you might create greater tension or you might aim for greater inter-ethnic harmony. These are particular assumptions that policymakers have, and that guides the specific policies that you see in particular societies. So in Singapore, our language policy, although it's been fine-tuned over the years, the basic DNA has been set by Lee Kuan Yew. And Lee Kuan Yew subscribes very clearly to a view of ethnic primordialism. So he's not particularly keen about protecting the rights, you hardly hear the word rights coming out of his mouth, of particular communities. His view is one more of pragmatic resignation. For him, there's a primordial instinct in every ethnic group to maintain their distinctiveness. if you force these different groups to assimilate to one another, you're going to create lots of unhappiness, rioting, or whatever else. So for him then, he's simply responding to what he feels is some kind of primordial urge to maintain the ethnic identity. And that's why the government then makes a very strong effort to try to support and maintain the vitality of individual ethnic mother tongues. So you might have a situation then over time where the mother tongues might lose out to English purely in terms of market forces. But I think that would happen despite the government's, I think, very concerted effort to prop up the mother tongues.
Well, Jane, I agree with what you're saying about how it looks as if inevitably English will win over, and that seems to be the scenario in most language environments around the world. I think the problem in Singapore, to add to what Lionel has said, is that there is this competing impulse to, in fact, reiterate one's own ethnic identity, actually contesting or competing with this global impulse to integrate into this larger global force through English. So one way I think in which, at least in the Tamil scenario, the vitality of Tamil language is actually being sustained against all odds is in fact through the expatriates. I don't know if the other two experts in language, Tamil language here will agree with me, but I certainly feel that at least amongst the Tamils, because of the influx of expatriates, youngsters who are bringing in a Tamil, shall we say, a greater expertise in speaking Tamil, and also bringing with them this a whole cultural baggage which has pretty much been lost in the Singapore context. There is a revitalization at actually definitely the primary school levels and at certain neighborhood secondary school levels of the Tamil language. But how long this will be sustained is the question. And also, this depends a lot on the expatriate population and the influx of expatriates. So it's a very dicey situation as far as Tamil is concerned.
I think in this respect, Chinese is a bit different. We have the rise of China. And it's like a morning sun, it's really rising. And it's really up to us to catch up with that. So if we can have fine-tuning of how we plan our curriculum, how we do our assessment, and stop frustrating the students and give them hope in learning, I think we have a good future in recovering Chinese, but we cannot wait too long. And I think since now, I think Singaporeans are very united. Maybe they can relax more about dialect, like the way we saw that the little footage. Let dialect come back in a way that will anchor us in our folk culture. I think Prof. Ko Tai An was telling me a lot about how the folk culture is very important in emotional resonance about being Chinese. I think in a large part, Mandarin is a superimposed language. Many of our kids learn it in school. Parents are asked to use it, but they're not really mother tongue. So let the dialects come back and readjust the curriculum, line them up with assessment and make it not just fun learning, but effective learning, and give them hope in scoring. Don't frustrate them. I think there's time to catch back, but we cannot wait any longer. I think a whole big generation has been sacrificed due to the changes that have been made.
So I agree with the earlier speaker about language policies in Singapore is really shaped actually by the government's ideology, and I think it's so much they have come up with this ideology that the Chinese speaks Mandarin, the Malays speak Malay, and the Tamil will speak Tamil, and it's a status quo, and because of this status quo, I think it has served us well. That's the main thing that the government wants to portray. It has served us well. Our young people are very bilingual. They can work overseas. They can be a global citizen. But at the same time, there's something to pull them back and make them stay in Singapore. Also, I think language is so tied to ethnic identification. Then for a Malay, if you say that it's language loss, then if you lose a language, then to the Malay, it's so tied to the ethnicity. Maybe it's also due to over years of being drummed into your head that you are Malay, that you speak Malay. So losing that part of the language will also probably, for the Malay as a community, probably would mean a loss of a sense of identity also. So this attachment is quite tight, to the extent that I think they will feel a bit uncomfortable if a Malay do not know how to speak Malay, and then it's not, the language is not transferred to the younger generation. Probably in an immigrant society like US, people are willing to give up their language of their native country because they are going to a new country. So they are more open to accepting the majority, the language of the majority. But because Singapore Malays are considered to be the indigenous people, and the indigenous people happen to speak Malay, so losing that Malay language would also mean losing that status. I have this deep feeling that the Malay will interpret losing Malay language as losing part of their ethnic identification.
The lady at the back, I think, had your hand up here. If you have, you want to direct your question to one or more speakers, that might help as well. Otherwise, we'll assume that it's a general question.
Okay. Hi, my name is Yurni. I'm a graduate student from Department of English Language and Literature. I have, maybe my first question is somewhat more general. I think we've heard so far basically discussions concerning mother tongue policies that concern language competence. So there's a lot of discussion about the pragmatic and pastoral functions of the mother tongue itself. Of course, the language policy is bureaucratically imposed, but at the same time also we've heard from the bottom up, voices from the ground, the need to establish a particular identity or to have kind of a common shared goal, maybe as a Singaporean identity and things like that. So, and from that perspective, the language as a social practice, how do these two perspectives reconcile, and how do we kind of in trying to kind of rethink our language policy, how do we kind of reconcile the two perspectives? My second question is directed to Dr. Aishah. I'm just wondering, I think you mentioned something like there's a tension between the effective and instrumental goal of learning the language, Malay and English. So I'm just wondering, for the young Singaporeans, do they see themselves more as Singaporeans or more as Malays? Because if they see themselves more as Singaporeans, then it seems to serve the state's goal of integration. I mean, yeah, just a question, just out of curiosity. Thanks.
Could you sum up that first question again? How do we reconcile the tensions between?
Between the perspective of language competence, which has always been discussed as I mean, when we talk about language policy, language planning, and curriculum planning, and also the idea that language itself is a social practice, something that emerges from...
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
The tensions or conflicts between language as a kind of social practice on the ground and language viewed from the top as a kind of a competence that needs to be acquired. I think the again, for me, I need to go back to very specifics, in this case to Singapore's language policy again. So in the Singapore situation, if you go back to good old Lee Kuan Yew again, the whole basis for this bilingual policy really is this feeling that, yes, we need a language for making us relevant to the world, competing, communicating with the world at large, as well as among the different ethnic groups. But we also need a language, as was paraphrased by Tony Tan later on, that helps us to know who we are. Now, Lee Kuan Yew's phrasing was a bit more, I think, interesting or more aggressive in a sense. He says something like, you know, we all need a particular language, otherwise we sort of feel lost in the world, so to speak. So the mother tongue is supposed to give you that language to help you or stop you from feeling lost in the world. I think one thing we have to recognize is that not everybody feels that without a particular language, they'll be lost in the world. Maybe I'm psychologically, I don't know, pathologically inclined or something, or I'm just a kind of sociopath when it comes to language or something like that. But I don't feel that kind of strong attachment. That kind of essentialism, I think, worries me more than anything else. The other thing, of course, that even if there were, and I admit, there are many groups and individuals for whom particular languages, certainly there's a strong sense of attachment. You feel that, you may feel a genuine sense of loss. But then there's a conflict, or there's a potential gap between you may feel a particular language represents your identity and you want to preserve it. But the other question is that from the government's perspective, or from me looking at the government, I can ask them, who decides for me which language represents the language that I feel a great loss towards? So Lee Kuan Yew has decided that for me as an ethnic Chinese, it has to be Mandarin. It could be Hokkien. It could be some version of Peranakan Malay. It could be nothing. It could be English. But the thing is, there is already this, I think, ideological issue about who decides, first of all, that without a particular language, you're going to feel emotionally bereft. And I decide for you, this is the language, purely on the basis of a further earlier decision. I've given you a particular ethnic classification, and from that ethnic classification, the language correspondence follows. Now, the point, I think for me about these practices then is that we have, government policy has to be increasingly sensitive to diversity and changes in practice, in language practices. So I'm not sure that we can just say that, for example, that Singapore somehow is not an immigrant society. And even if it was or isn't, I think the key point is that in any society, you're going to have changes in the language. So we have to be very clear then, not to be too misled or to be invested too much in the label we give to a language. There is a variety that we name it. We call this thing English, as though that, and that allows us to engage in some kind of fiction that is a fairly monolithic, stable entity. Well, Englishes, English-sizing, languages, languaging becomes, I guess, the more so-called current way of thinking about language as social practice. And once you appreciate that, then even to talk about Malay, Mandarin, Tamil, or English as a language that needs to be preserved is in some sense, and this goes back to, I guess, the part of the thing that Chitra had in her own presentation, in some sense it's at odds with the recognition that language is a living thing. So you get a very interesting, I think, a problem which I think is highlighted in immigrant societies where there's a debate about heritage language education, but I think it's starting to make itself felt somewhere in Singapore as well. So in a study by people from Birmingham, Blackfish and Creasy, what they looked at was the desires of Bangladeshi communities in Birmingham to try to preserve their language. Then you get a very interesting debate internal to that community between the parents, the educators, and of course, the ones with relatively less voice, the students themselves, as to which variety of Bengali or Sylheti best represents so-called the language of the home, the old country. Should it be this particular standard variety, or it should be something more colloquial? And then when he goes into the classroom, you get kids who have grown up speaking English because they've grown up in Birmingham. And then for them, the question is, well, I feel perfectly happy in my ethnic identity, and I don't need to learn either Bengali or Sylheti to feel that way. And I mean, when I came back from a recent workshop in Cape Town, we had a very interesting discussion or presentation by Suresh Kanagaraja, who's an educationist based in Pennsylvania. And Suresh, as an educationist who grew up in Sri Lanka, his point was that he's constantly being bombarded by anxieties from his friends, relatives, who are part of the Tamil diaspora. They are located in Canada, in England, back in Sri Lanka as well, and in other parts of the States. And they keep on asking him things like, my children aren't speaking Tamil, what should we do? So Suresh basically told us what he did was that he spent, I guess, Christmas or traveling around, meeting relatives, and then getting to a sense of what is going on in their lives. And he had a very interesting interaction with one of the children of his, I think his friends, who are about 6 or 7 years old. And when they are speaking what appears to him to be a kind of a mix between bits of Tamil and bits of English, having grown up in Canada. So he says to this 6-year-old kid, I see you're speaking some kind of Tamil English. And the kid says very sincerely, no, I'm speaking Tamil. But again, that's the label, whatever you want to call it. The practices are constantly changing. And Suresh finds other Tamils in other parts of the world who basically find that the best way, or they're quite happy at ease, feeling Tamil, manifesting their Tamilness by occasionally attending certain cultural events, learning certain old songs, or learning a certain instrument. But for some of them, the language itself is increasingly not a particularly important part of what they need to have in order to feel Tamil. And Suresh tries to end, but again, he's, I think, speaking to, for me anyway, from a fairly critical, enlightened view as an educationist. He tries to end on what he thinks he can bring to his, he keeps on speaking of his people, a fairly optimistic message, that the Tamil diaspora is alive and well. The language is alive and well, provided you don't stick to a preservationist, essentialist, static notion of language and culture. What's happening then is that Tamils all over the world are actively adapting and readapting their language and cultural practices to integrate and make the best use they can of whatever different environments they find themselves in. And for him, that's exactly what you want to bear in mind if you're trying to treat the language and culture as a living entity.
No, I just want to say that Lionel conducted a mini tutorial there, very comprehensive one, so there's very little to add to that. Just 2 points that I want to emphasize. Basically, there were points that were brought up by Lionel. One is this ethnic essentialism that he mentioned. I thought there was a very interesting and important point with regard to Tamil, at least. Because it contrasts with the kind of ethnic mosaic that is coming into place in Singapore now. In amongst the Indians, at least, we have so many other speakers of Telugu and Kannada, all of them coming into Singapore, and of course this essentialist view of Tamil being associated with Indian is problematizing things a little. That's one point. And the second is, of course, when you talked about the sense of loss, it's also very directly tied to the generational perspective from the migrant point of view. That is, first generation immigrants usually feel a greater sense of loss to this associated language, to their identity, less so for people of second and third generations. Yeah, that's about it.
I agree with the change that is taking place. I mean, the Malay language itself was a language, the lingua franca. We talk about people from overseas coming to Singapore. It's a migrant community here. Yeah, even previously, migrants came to Singapore, but the language of communication was Malay, and then it was slowly being replaced by English. But then again, Singapore Malays also cannot actually identify themselves with Malaysians. They also have developed their own repertoire of words, which is very peculiar to our situation. And yeah, we are not trying to go back to a certain kind of classical Malay language that we are supposed to work towards, But in language and communication, yeah, the language that is spoken is already changing, and it takes shapes. It has taken shape according to the environment that we live in. And we know that language, we cannot hope to have Malay language as a national language, but actually we have to maintain Malay language to a certain level that when we speak to a Malaysian, we know that is a Malay language. Or when we speak to in Bahasa Indonesia or Bahasa Brunei, then we know that we are people of this region shares a certain standardized version that allows certain kind of communication. It's not. I think it's not. The language is a form of identification that you are Malay, but then it's not a tool to unite people in that region, because I see that the development of national language in Malaysia has gone in their direction, the direction that they have charted for themselves, and then the Indonesians also have their own institutions to develop their own language, and Indonesians will not. Presently, I think they will not many are not aware that Indonesian is an offshoot of Malay language, and Malay language was previously used to unite the whole of Indonesia, and it was used as a national language to unite all the little islands all over Indonesia. But ever since the proclamation of Malay as the national language, the language has developed so much that they have got their own identity. Singaporeans will not say that that's Malay language. Also, they will come to a stage that they must also learn the language to understand how and what the language is all about actually. Although, I think the youngsters in Singapore, they identify themselves as Singaporean, but they know because of classification from the mother tongue policy, perhaps, maybe that's why they are categorized as Malay. They know who they are, but then if you are asked to learn the language, we will do it. But then because we are the minority and integration is not a question, because we have grown with the system. We go to the same school. We speak the English language or Singlish. Actually, without Malay language or without Chinese dialects, I think there's no Singlish. They'll be speaking English. There's many young. I think there was a conversation between a little girl and one of our friends, and my Malay friend asked the little girl, "So, Naja, what are you? Are you Malay? Are you a Malay?" And she was saying, "I thought I'm English because I spoke English all my life. I thought I'm English, but unfortunately not. I'm a Malay."
Sir?
I think I'm directing this to Dr. Chitra, because you were mentioning about the Indian expats. We know that we have a substantial number of Indian expats in Singapore. According to Tabla, it's around 200,000. It's quite a large number. I was quite happy that, probably because of the influx, we will have some sort of a revival of Tamil. But I did a study recently, and I found this is not the case. Because once these people arrive, they also wanted to be integrated in the mainstream. They switched to English. They want some sort of a recognition from the Singapore community, and they don't want to be left out one. The other thing, I think, Dr. Chitra, we also have to look at this government policy, like, domestic helpers. Now they have to pass English before they can be engaged here. As a result, now the Indian families can't bring people from India, especially the maids from there, because the people who are coming as maids are from rural area, and the only language they are able to speak is Tamil. And they don't want Tamil-speaking people here. So the home environment, again, is affected because of this. There's no opportunity for the children to use the language at all. So the only place where they learn and they maintain the language in school, that's all. Okay? So they can't practice, there's no reinforcement anywhere. All the domains are actually taken by English. Now, the other factor is actually, I think last year, I think they passed this regulation. That, again, going to be affect our Indian community, especially the Tamil, offering Tamil as a second language. They are coming out with this hyphenated ethnic identity. Government will say, because of the interracial marriages, that these people can be they choose a Chinese Indian or Indian Chinese or Indian Malay, that sort of mixture. So we do not know what sort of language they're going to take as a second language. Again, this is going to affect. And the other thing is actually we are actually no more in the ethnic enclaves. Majority are living in HDB flats. So because of the ethnic protection, what they call integration policy the government has passed, I think hardly we can see an Indian in any block, or maybe even if we found, probably they are not neighbors. So there's no way actually the Indian community actually can use the language at all. The only place they can use is maybe in the commercial area, like in Little India, that's all. So there's no way, all right? This is again, we have to recognize that the whole language landscape has changed. Singapore, they were unavoidable. I think there's no way we can reverse. So it's something like driving a car where your one leg is actually on the accelerator, the other one is in the brake. So we are pushing English is important. The other side, we are saying our mother tongue is important. I do not know what way we are going to take. Thanks.
I was wondering if that was a comment or did you want me to respond to it? No. Because I agree with everything you say. Just a couple of things that I would like to add. One is, yes, I agree that most expats who come to Singapore want to be integrated. The impulse is to integrate into the Singapore environment, and therefore they also are seeking, like most typical migrant communities, they're seeking upward mobility, and they feel that comes with English language, proficiency in English language, and therefore they are very ready to adopt, a more Singaporean English identity as they see it. But at the same time, I think with the influx of expatriate Indians, the Tamils particularly, they also bring with them a certain kind of cultural baggage, which they do not shed in a hurry. And I think that does at least have resonances within their home. It may not be something that they take out to the society or to the to outside their home, but within their home they have certain cultural resonances which I think do have an impact on the children within the home. Whether these children will in turn try to enthuse their subsequent generation of their subsequent progeny in that kind of environment is questionable, of course. But I think as it stands, first generation, immigrants usually have that kind of cultural resonance at home, which does help in the learning and the retaining of the mother tongue, number one. Number two, I think, though this is not something that very many Tamils even like to admit, the fact remains that Tamil films play a very important role in actually bringing about a certain kind of cool image. For me, it's highly repugnant, the kind of cool image that is, advocated in Tamil films. But then I admit readily that I'm of the minority probably, and getting old. So therefore, I think that also helps. I've found that in a lot of neighborhood schools, Tamil films and actually identifying with the whole Tamil film scenario actually helps them want to learn the Tamil language, or at least have retain some basic knowledge of Tamil. Let's put it that way. I don't know whether they will actually learn it. I don't want to be too optimistic. I don't think it's actually, but I think it's at least helping them to feel that they're not totally uncool in learning Tamil. Let me put it that way. And that, I think, is because of the increasing influence of the expat Tamils. So, those are the things that I would like to actually say. But I agree, by and large with everything that you have mentioned.
Time for one last question. Lady in the corner.
Hi, I'm Divya from Global Asia Institute. Mine is more of a comment, more of a suggestion actually. In the last 3 presentations, I think one common thread we heard about is the need for an active and interactive teaching of mother tongue. Something that I would like to add from the perspective of bringing a language alive is whether we might want to go back to teaching a subject other than mother tongue, in particular something like moral education, which will not jeopardize the grades of students who are weak in mother tongue, but which would add day-to-day vocabulary to their list of terms they use. And also the other thing is that would help them think in the mother tongue while speaking it, rather than think in English and translate it to mother tongue. And I was wondering what you think, whether this is possible, given it used to be done in the late 80s and early 90s. Thank you.
I think, speaking as a non-expert, I think that's a very interesting idea. But I suspect the effect will be to make students hate moral education. Okay, I think they concur. Anne, did you have a question?
Sorry to butt in at the end, but a question for Dr. Lee. English in Singapore, English, I don't mean Singlish, I mean the way English is spoken in Singapore, it doesn't have many figures of speech or colourful bits. And I'm told that Mandarin also is very pragmatic and goal-oriented. But the dialects are full of sayings and proverbs. And I'm wondering, is anything being done before the dialects practically die out to collect these wonderful sayings? Because I know some of them in English, translated by friends. The other thing was a comment on the question of language and identity. One branch of my in-laws, very powerful branch, is Guyana Chinese, whose ancestors left China and were taken as bond servants to South America in the 1870s. They have totally lost their language. And in fact, one of the older men I spoke to didn't even know what dialect group he was. He said, I think we're Punti, which I understand is really Bunde, meaning Cantonese as against Hakka. But they've totally lost their language. But they're jolly sure they're Chinese. And they carry out lots of practices that would be totally in line with Chinese culture. But language, not at all. They speak a sort of steel band English, West Indies type of English. But no problem that their identity. That, of course, I haven't seen them facing people from China and whether they would then be embarrassed or anything like that. But among themselves, I've seen most of them in Toronto, they're very confident that they're Chinese, but they don't speak any language, any Chinese language.
Thanks, Prof. I think you're correct in saying that the Chinese here are not as colorful, or stylistically, it's in a way, I've heard people tell me that, hey, you know, the Chinese used in Singapore sounds like it's spoken by children. I guess, again, this is because Mandarin is a largely superimposed language. During the discussion earlier on, when Lionel was talking about not handling a language and leaving it in a static form, perhaps Singapore can relax in terms of letting Singaporean Chinese be Singaporean Chinese, in a way that you don't force them to only speak Mandarin. Because when you force them to only speak Mandarin, the kind of Mandarin we have is not the Mandarin that the mainland Chinese speak. And then we have lost our own dialect and all the colorful culture and folk culture and everything. So we're left in between. We don't have the roots and we don't have the high language. We are left with nothing, very watered down version of everything. I think since the government has been so successful in the Speak Mandarin campaign, perhaps dialect should come back. Asking about dialect, I think the clan associations are giving lessons to preserve them, but I don't think that's enough. I mean, if you remember earlier on, we had two religious leaders singing Hokkien song on front page of Straits Times. Remember that? I think one from a Taoist Buddhist, and then the other one was from a Christian, and they were singing Tik Nan Tik Bua, which means, half each, like you come halfway and I come halfway. And I asked myself, why didn't they make themselves sing Mandarin? Why was it Hokkien? I think the emotional resonance have to be there. So if we allow Singaporeans to get back the color again, I think our connection with our roots and the possibility of us attaining higher level of Mandarin will be there. Incidentally, I know of more than one person who have finished their university education, and they chose to go to Fudan in China for an immersion program of 6 months, so that they're able to brush up their Chinese. And it's a shame that, we do have Chinese lessons here. Why don't we plan in such a way that they can really achieve that by the time they finish JC2? Instead of talking about maintaining standard, it's not about maintaining standard. It's really catering to their needs. So if you allow Singaporean Chinese to be Singaporean Chinese, it can be more colorful and effective, I think.
Any other questions? Tan?
I'd like to ask, first of all, I compliment the organizers on having all people discussing the problems of the mother tongue from the perspectives of all the mother tongue languages in Singapore, because I found it extremely, extremely illuminating. I'd like to ask a radical question. A post-bilingual, what do the speakers, forgive me, Robbie, since it requires each of them to respond, or not at all, what do the speakers see as a kind of post-bilingualism future? That, going back to what Lionel said, Lionel and a lot of people in Singapore are very fatalistic. It's in our DNA. Lee Kuan Yew has this primordial essentialism, right? To be radical, you could say he could be projecting his own inadequacies onto the rest of the population, because somewhere along the line, being Peranakan, he had to learn Hokkien, remember, and learn Mandarin. Somebody asked him, how is it you're Chinese, you cannot speak Chinese, and he took it to heart. Anyway, and the whole link between language and culture. Supposing we shed all the historical, the political baggage, the chauvinistic baggage, which includes having to fob off the Chinese educated with the line that we're not destroying language and culture, and coming up with a language policy which may have outlived its usefulness by linking language and culture. Tony Tan is still being quoted, right, what he said, right? And that was 1986. That whole thing about English for utility, mother tongue for a culture, has it outlived its time, right? And the national language, which is national language in name. Okay, many people forgot that the lingua franca was actually Bahasa Malay. People like us all spoke Bahasa Malay. We spoke to Malays, Eurasians, Indians, other Chinese who do not know our dialect in Bahasa Malay, right? So before Singlish. Now, think what would you all say about, we get rid of all these linkages, all this baggage that has been loaded upon us by politicians and other people with their own agendas, including language teachers perhaps. That we let Singaporean children choose the language, the second language, a true bilingualism, choose a second language which need not be their so-called mother tongue, because the whole situation now is so inauthentic and dishonest. That the Chinese have as a mother tongue, which as Southerners was not our mother tongue. 1957 census, which is quoted in Eddie Kwok's article, showed only 0.1% of the Chinese in Singapore spoke Mandarin. There were 11 dialects. We lost with losing 11 dialects, right? What do you all think? Say, if I want to learn Malay, why not? And if most of the children in Singapore want to learn Malay because mistakenly they think it's an easy language, let them. What do you all think?
Thanks very much, Tan. I think that's a very interesting question, actually. We're a bit over time, so I'm going to make that the last question, but I'm going to ask all the panelists to respond in whatever way they think appropriate. And I think that's very useful, really, a kind of future think of the linguistic landscape of Singapore. Yeah, so by turn. Yeah.
Well, okay, a couple of points. One, Tony Tan is still being quoted, I guess with good reason, because if we're interested in the policy and the ideology behind the policy, that hasn't changed. So even with the hyphenated thing that we're talking about now that came into effect in 1st January, it really is still a monolingual or monocultural view of language and ethnicity clumped onto, it's kind of superficial cosmetic hybridity clumped onto the same old mother tongue position, right? You can have an hyphenated identity, but you're forced to decide which is the dominant one, and then once that becomes the dominant, you're basically having one ethnic identification, and the mother tongue allocated to you follows the same old logic as well. So I think there's a reason why these things are being trotted out, because they're still relevant if we're trying to understand why Singapore's language policy is the way it is. In terms of a post-bilingual language policy, I guess it goes back to what I was trying to say, which in some sense, I guess, is similar to what you were suggesting. There has to be room for greater autonomy, individuals, multiple lived experiences, for individuals to make their choices. The important thing for this is because I think Singapore society is getting more and more complex. And coming back to, I think what one of the other speakers was hinting about then, is that in a world where you might face somebody, if you have, let's say you're a Chinese migrant and you grew up in South America, for example, and you completely lost any inkling of the languages, but you still happy with your Chinese identity. Now, the very interesting question is, what happens when you come face-to-face with somebody from PRC? That's the interesting question. I think what our language policy needs to do is not, okay, I'm going to be a bit facetious here, perhaps. You don't want to have a protect your mother tongue kind of policy or campaign. You want something like screw the mother tongue policy campaign, which basically says you want to empower people with the confidence if they meet somebody from so-called the old country and they accuse you of being authentic or having lost your roots. You want to be able to engage in a fairly intelligent conversation as to why these kinds of assumptions are questionable, if not completely erroneous. And I think that's important because otherwise you're going to face with people who are increasingly chauvinistic. For me, the recurrent examples are two. One, a couple of years ago, I happened to be walking behind two female undergraduates, and I heard them speaking to each other. One was saying to her friend, "I completely lost all respect for Kylie Kwong, an Australian Chinese chef." And her friend asked her, "Why?" She said, "Because I just found out Kylie doesn't speak a word of Chinese." Well, she grew up in Australia from migration. Why should she be obligated to speak Chinese? Another example is work from my friends who did fieldwork in Sri Lanka on Sri Lanka Malays, the Malay community over there. They spoke a different variety of Sri Lanka, obviously because of the context situation with other languages. But apparently, when somebody from Malaysia heard of their existence, this person went down there and offered them resources, education materials, so that they could learn the real Malay. And to my dismay, obviously, they were so happy because now they realized how wrong they've been speaking the language all these generations. And I think that's the kind of thing that needs to be interrogated. I think what we need then is a policy that I think empowers people to critically question fairly apparently commonsensical assumptions about language identity and obligations to speak particular languages because you happen to have a certain kind of identity, and engage, I think, in questions and discussions about that. The problem with that, obviously, is that it cannot be just an individual decision, or it should be, but it runs up very quickly against, to put it very simplistically, communitarianism. Because language, culture, these things are vital and are felt to be alive to the extent they're widely practiced. So if a group of speakers slowly, individually, one by one, decide to exit from that group and stop speaking the language, other people may feel like, well, those who actually want the language to continue may feel that the ability for that language to continue is very much dependent on other people being forced to stay in and being prevented from renouncing the language. Then you come up against this tricky question of individual autonomy versus cultural or group obligation. But again, for me, the only answer to these things is to get people to be prepared to engage in a fairly rational public discussion about obligations and rights and whatever else, rather than jump into, again, old-fashioned essentialism.
Diane, to be honest, I think your question has put me in a spot because really what it has raised is something that I have been struggling with for a long time. On the one hand, I'm, as a liberal academic, I'm all for choice. I'm pro-choice, and I believe that any kind of authoritarianism is repugnant to most of us, and therefore I think any kind of kind of prescriptive way of saying this should be the language that this particular race or person should read is something that is fundamentally, I feel, wrong. That's one side of me. I must also confess to the fact that even as I profess to all these views, the idea that my children might completely lose Tamil is something that causes me a lot of anxiety. I'm being very honest here. So I would actually be very liberal in certain platforms, but when it actually came to the point when I had to say, are you completely okay with your children not knowing a word of Tamil, I would have deep anxieties. And that's probably my insecurity. But so I think the question you have raised is a very important question that all of us are actually struggling with. Not just in Singapore, I think in the kind of global situation that we're in, where there's so much of migrations to and fro from various parts of the world, I think many people are struggling with that identity. And I think it'll take a long time before I reach the level of sophistication that I would like to, where I would really say that it does not matter what language I speak or my children speak, my identity would nevertheless remain secure. I hope to reach that point at some time, but I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime, for me at least. Right. Yeah, that assumption you feel needs to be challenged, and I agree with you there.
I think as a linguist, I feel that it's a sad situation. During my time, if you can guess, during my time, we speak all the different languages. Yeah, I still remember walking in the States to a Cantonese restaurant, and I was talking to somebody in Mandarin, and I immediately switched to the person in Cantonese. And this Cantonese restaurant runner just looked at me and asked this Hong Kong friend, where is she from? I switched with such ease between Cantonese and Mandarin, and later on was English. And I thought, I didn't have to learn all this consciously. It was the environment. I was very, very grateful for the environment. We had a fertile land here, And I think if I could wind back the time, allow that to happen, in Chinese we always say, 百花齐放, allow the dialects to grow, allow the Mandarin to grow, allow the English to grow, and not choke everything. Because in the end, when you choke everything becomes artificial and ugly and malnutrition. So if you ask me what I want to see beyond bilingualism, multilingualism to come back, again, this is wishful thinking.
For the Malays, I think there's this element of the government they will see themselves as a guardian again. It's in the constitution, and there's a fundamental law as a fundamental law of the country. Then there's this Article 152, minorities and special position of the Malays. So if they take out that from the constitution, where the government's position is to recognize the special position of the Malay as indigenous people of the Malay, and that they have the responsibility to safeguard, protect, foster, promote the interests of the Malay language. So I don't know, that would probably tie the government down, and then to have a free for all situation where you can choose the language that we want to learn. I think then we have to wait for a few generations until the Malays feel that they are quite confident enough, I think, to let go of this article in the Constitution, to let go of that so-called right. And be confident enough to say that I want to learn Mandarin, I want to learn other languages so that I'm on par with other Singaporeans. Then I think the scenario would be we can look forward to with no mother tongue policy maybe, and then it's open. Probably the nice fit for. The nice example, I think, would be like our Center for Language in the Faculty of Arts. I mean, students, there are 3,000 students learning 12 languages, and they come back to learn it from level 1 to 6, and they enjoy themselves. They think that the language will help them to position themselves in the global market. They have the choice to choose which language they think they can develop themselves in. Even Malay, to our surprise, Malay is still being sought after because they think that it's a language that they can use to communicate with people in this region. They want to do their field work. They still want to learn the Malay language to talk to the elderly. They need the language to speak to older folks, and they believe that by learning the Malay language, they are also equipping themselves with certain language skills. Maybe we should pitch language learning at just acquiring language skills, since our education goals has already been so instrumental. Maybe equipping students, children with language skills, not tied down to mother tongue could be the way in our post-bilingual scene, I think, in Singapore. That's all.
Tan, I'm going to make a wild prediction. 2016 or 2021, whichever is the election year, okay, there will be an announcement, no more, the end of mother tongue policy. Because it's just going to be intolerable, the kinds of transnational flows and the kind of issues that Lionel raised, the hyphenization and the what is mother tongue, what if your English was your mother tongue? If you came from America, for the UK, for example. But with, of course, because of the constitutional role of protect, the special role of Malays, there will have to be some kind of institution to safeguard Malay language and culture. And there will probably be some kind of point system that privileges our heritage Asian languages like Chinese and Tamil and maybe Hindi. But possibly for PRs to gain citizenship, you'll be tested at least in a kind of language skills way that Aishah talks about in those languages. But other than that, the mother tongue policy, as we know, I suspect, will be gone by 2016, 2021, somewhere around there. I wouldn't mind if you give me odds. I'm that sure about it, reasonably sure about it. Well, thank you everyone for making this such a lively panel. Please join me again in thanking our wonderful speakers. And thank you so much for joining us for the launch of the Singapore Research Nexus. Your presence was greatly appreciated. Thank you. So